Hi everyone, welcome to today's session of the Exploring Legal Futures webinars. So my name is Maria and I am the Outreach, One Participation and Communications Coordinator here at the Faculty of Law. And today's session is all about exploring legal career pathways for people that have not studied law at university. So we've got two wonderful guests who we'll let introduce themselves in just a second, and they'll talk about their experiences going into law, entering a legal career without having studied law or having done other careers in the past. But a couple of housekeeping notes first. This webinar is being recorded and we will be uploading the recording of the webinar on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. And also regarding questions, we've got quite a lot of pre-submitted questions. So thank you so much to everybody who pre-submitted those, and we will get to those first. We will get to those after we finish the panel discussion, and then we will also be getting to the live questions after the pre-submitted questions as well. So if you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please do put them in the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. You do not need to wait until the end. Just put them at the Q&A box whenever they sort of show up for you, and we can address them if they're relevant to something we're discussing as well. All right, so this is it from me for now. So if I just hand it on to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves, so maybe say where they're working, what they're doing, and just really briefly about what they studied as well. Maybe if we start with Alex first.
Yeah, I'm Alex. Nice to meet all of you. I guess I could go in chronological order. So I studied history at Cambridge, which I really enjoyed. So I did that for 3 years from 2016 to 2019. And that was a subject I really enjoyed in school. So I decided to pursue at university, really enjoyed it. In my final year, I started thinking about what I'd want to do afterwards, and I looked at law. I went to a few recruitment events. I ended up doing a vacation scheme with Hogan Lovells in 2019. Really enjoyed that experience. Ended up getting a training contract off the back of that, which I accepted. So I then went through the conversion course process, which was 1 year. I then did the LPC, which was another year, something that's now being gradually phased out. Did the 2 year training contract and qualified as a solicitor about 18 months ago. So I'm now practicing as a lawyer. And yeah, happy to answer any questions that you have on that as they come up.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And we'll touch on a lot of those topics that Alex mentioned in more detail. So don't worry if you're thinking, oh, I heard something and I'm not sure what it's about. So yeah. Jean, what about yourself?
Hello, hi, I'm Jean. I'm also at Hogan Lovells at the moment. So following Alex's example, I'll go from chronological order as well. So I studied medicine at Cambridge from 2008 to 2014. And then after I graduated, I went on to become a doctor, as I suppose you would. I then left medicine, so left being a doctor in 2022. After I had a training contract offer as well from Hogan Lovells. And then I went on to do the conversion course, the postgraduate diploma for law, I think is now called, at BPP, and then I did the SQE, so which is the solicitors qualifying exams, because by I think I was the second year where the LPC was kind of phased out. And so I joined Hogan Lovells as a trainee solicitor about 6 months ago. I've just completed my first seat. So essentially you do 4 kind of rotations in 4 different departments at the same firm. Generally, that's how it works. So I did my first one in a department called real estate disputes or property litigation. And I've literally just started today in my second rotation or seat, which is in the debt capital markets team, in the sub team called derivatives.
Brilliant, very interesting as well. So really different pathways there. So that'll be interesting to hear more about them actually. But the first thing I'd like to ask, first to Alex and then to Jean, is how did you make the decision to go into law? And more importantly, was that something you were considering before you started university, or is it something that came up during university? How did you take kind of the decision and say, I actually don't want to study the subject, so I don't want to work in the subject that I'm currently studying. I actually want to go into law.
I actually hadn't considered doing a legal career at the outset of my degree. I'd chosen the degree based basically on what I enjoyed doing at school, so kept going with that at university and thought this gives me some options. I'll think about what I want to do later on. And yeah, I was lucky that Cambridge had like a really good career service, so I was able to engage with that and get access to a lot of events on different types of careers and what those would involve. I mentioned in my final year I started thinking about law. I mean, that may actually have been relatively late, actually, as it turns out. I was lucky that I was able to do that. But ideally, like the sooner you can engage with these types of things, the better. I ended up going to quite a few of the working and recruitment events that the university hosted. And from that, I was able to speak to a lot of people and got some sort of insight from that of what the reality of the job is. But I only really got that in sort of this full reality when I did a vacation scheme at Hogan Lovells, because that was like a simulation of what the job would actually be. And it's quite difficult to glean from sort of what's available online, what it actually involves until you've had a chance to do it. So that was really helpful for me. And that sort of simulation was a positive experience for me, and one that made me feel as if this was something that I could do and enjoy as a job. So that's kind of how I ended up making the decision. I definitely hadn't contemplated it from the outset. Um, yeah, that's how I ended up where I am.
And what about you, Jean? Because you did it a little bit later in life, so perhaps you didn't have the same university experiences as Alex did.
Yes, that is correct. So I obviously studied I suppose what you'd call a vocational degree. I'd always I'd always wanted to be a doctor pretty much from quite early on. And I sort of thought I would be a doctor for the rest of my life. And I enjoyed my job. I mean, with every job there are good bits and bad bits. But overall, I thought it was a worthwhile cause. It was enjoyable. You meet lots of different people. So the reason why I left medicine, so I suppose I'll divide it into why the reason why I stopped being a doctor and why I went into law. So the reason I stopped being a doctor was because when I was pregnant, so I have two children. When I was pregnant both times, I faced a lot of pregnancy-related discrimination, and I think sort of from an employee perspective, that kind of it really sort of ended kind of my, I suppose, loyalty, to the NHS, and sort of felt it's not really an organization I feel I want to work for anymore. And I did know I wanted to carry on working, so I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mum. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I tried it out and it wasn't for me. And my husband was a lawyer, or is a city solicitor in tax, and um, during the pandemic, when everyone started working from home, I kind of got a real sense of what he did. Before, we kept our careers quite separate, or our professional lives. And I thought, to me, it felt like it had a lot of the things I liked about medicine, and not a lot of the rubbish in about medicine. So that's what kind of drew me to law, from the outset. And sort of, I suppose, having not studied law at university and particularly being a career changer, I also went to a lot of events, and I had the benefit of having my husband, and sort of I came into it with my eyes open. Yeah.
You said that there were a couple of things that are in law quite similar with medicine, a couple of qualities that attracted you to law that were also the qualities that had attracted you in medicine. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, maybe?
So so I guess this is quite personal to me. When I was a doctor, I've tried my hand at a lot of things because you kind of have to. It's the way the training works. And I knew that I liked something that was high pressure and fast paced. That's kind of personal to me. Not everyone enjoys that, but I do. I kind of get a bit bored when it's a bit slow. So I wanted something like that. And I suppose medicine and law are quite similar in the sense that it's quite a structured life, structured career progression. And from my perspective, it wasn't a huge leap from kind of coming off of one similar profession to another. And I think sort of law is very broad. both me and Alex are in sort of, I suppose, commercial law, but there are lots of different types of law. There are lots of kind of things you can get to do with a sort of a career in law, or even having a background in law. So it felt like in a way I wasn't committing myself to something very, very specific, and if it, if one thing didn't work out, it could lead to another, whereas I'm not, I don't know, setting myself to do one very specific set of skills. So that was also very nice. So it wasn't like, it was a very open path.
Oh, yeah, you'd never think law and medicine are similar, wouldn't you? But when you're actually describing them, I'm thinking, oh gosh, yeah, they definitely are. Okay, so a question a lot of people will ask, and understandably so, is okay, so I know I want to go into law, but how do I actually convert to law? What is the process for them going from a non-legal degree to a legal career? So maybe if we start with Alex, could you maybe walk us through a little bit the vacation scheme that you did, and then yeah, how that kind of led to getting a training contract and what qualifications you needed to take, and then yeah, if Ginny can do the same, because I think the Ginny system might be a little bit closer to what the actual current system is, but I'd still quite like to hear kind of Alex's experiences anyway.
Okay, yeah. So the vacation scheme it's kind of like a mini training contract. So the training contract is the standard process for qualifying as a solicitor, which is like one genre of lawyer. And the vacation scheme is 3 weeks long. So it's a little bit different to the types of internships that a lot of other organizations do, particularly a lot of sort of city employers like banks, which will have like internships that last the entire summer. The vacation scheme one, or the vacation scheme format that most of the law firms do, it's usually only 2 or 3 weeks, and it's designed to give you an impression of what the career would be like. So in my case, I had 3 weeks in 3 different departments, which gave me some variety and a little bit of an insight into what different areas of the law would be like. So that did put me in a better position to assess whether or not I'd enjoy the career as a whole, as opposed to one particular dimension of it. After accepting the offer of a training contract, which I got at the end of that vacation scheme, I went on to the conversion course, which if you accept a training contract with Hogan Lovells and you're coming from a non-law background, I believe you still have to do. So this part will still be relevant. And the conversion course is designed to level you up basically to the point where you would be at if you've done a law degree from a non-law background. So they take what's in a law degree, strip out the elements that are considered essential, and teach those to you in a sort of accelerated time frame. So the style of learning feels a lot more like GCSE or A level than a degree actually, because there's not as much like independent study or research. It's more about learning quite a big volume of information that's sort of fed to you at a fast pace. So the main thing that helps to succeed with that is just being organized and time management. But it's definitely manageable. And in a lot of ways, it is more straightforward than the degree because there's a little bit less independent thinking involved. It's more sort of just learning stuff very quickly. After that, I did the legal practice course, which you might hear referred to as the LPC, which is an extension of either your conversion course or your law degree. And that was designed to give you more of the practical skills that you would need when you actually started practicing as a professional, as a trainee. I think that's now being phased out in favor of the solicitors qualifying exam, or the SQE, which I didn't personally do, so I don't have as much insight into that.
Jean, you did do that, so good segue into talking about that.
Yeah, so I'll just follow on from what Alex said about the SQE, because before it's the same basically. Yeah, so I mean, I think most city law firms don't. If you sort of do these courses with their sponsorship, they'll put you in the SQE route now. And I mean, the SQE is different in the sense that the LPC was supposed to prepare you to become a trainee solicitor, whereas the SQE technically, once you pass those exams, puts you at the level of a first day qualified solicitor. So it's meant to put you at a higher level. And I think part of the reason why that was brought in apparently was that there are people who don't follow, say, necessarily the traditional training contract route, but they have had a lot of legal experience. And for them, they can take the SQE and not have to do another 2 years of training contract, which would sort of probably require a pay cut, for example. So I think there are some people who have gone down that route where they sort of just take the exams and then they can carry on with their work. I think so. A lot of the city law firms do it at kind of the same places, and I would say there is a high volume. So I think there is a higher volume of work than compared to the conversion course, and the exams are more difficult in the sense that as I understood it, it's because it's multiple choice questions, at least for half of the exams. And I think people coming from certain uh, degrees would struggle with that because they're not used to doing it, because it's not essays. And secondly, the exam is long. It's like, I think, 5 hours in total per exam. There are two of them for the first SQE1, and it's closed book, which, as I understand, a lot of people now are not very used to. So you go to an exam center, you have to sometimes get up very early for it. So that's sorry, I should have said that's SQE1. So that's kind of testing your knowledge. So it is just like a memorizing exercise. And then SQE2 tests more kind of your practical and, I suppose, soft skills, you might say, sort of your writing skills, how well you can explain things. So they are, I think, a set of 16 exams spread over 2 weeks, and they test various oral and mostly writing skills. You still need the knowledge, but before you just kind of have to recall a lot of detail, like minute detail, whereas here you sort of have to have an overview of the knowledge and essentially string it into a sentence, put it in prose, and to kind of apply it to a situation. So it's not like writing an essay, it's more kind of writing the answer to a problem, but in prose. So that's essentially what the two are like. But then with SQE2, you don't have to learn much new knowledge or very little new knowledge. So you just revise the knowledge that you've done for SQE1. So I would say SQE1 was kind of like a heavy memorizing exercise, and the SQE2 is probably a bit easier. Yeah.
Sounds quite stressful. I would say 16 exams over 2 weeks. I definitely don't like the sound of that.
A little bit.
But you actually mentioned something about funding that I wanted to touch on. So obviously you both mentioned that you've done kind of different qualifications in order to start your training contract and qualify as a solicitor and whatnot. Are those conversion courses, are those funded by the company that you do your training contract at? And if not, if they are funded, are they always funded, or are there specific exceptions? I don't know if you can, maybe speak about Hogan Lovells, because obviously you are at Hogan Lovells as well.
So if you get the training contract in advance of the training, then they will pay for, Hogan Lovells will pay for the legal training. So they'll pay the course fees for the the conversion course, and the SQE now. They'll also give you like a maintenance grant. So yeah, they will do both of those things.
That's helpful to know, because I imagine, I know they would go through my head if I just heard about all those conversion courses about, oh gosh, no, more fees, more tuition fees. That's great. Okay, so kind of going back to a lot of what Jean said about soft skills and essay writing and all of those lovely, lovely things. Do you feel like your Cambridge degrees helped you in, in your vacation schemes, in your applications, your SQE, all of that process? Do you think, like, although you didn't do something that was directly linked to your degree, did you gain skills that were still helpful during the application process, and maybe skills that are helpful to you even now, as you're, practicing or almost practicing lawyers? So, Alex, if you want to go first, and then Jean.
Yeah, I think my degree still does help me now, actually, mostly with the writing aspect, because yeah, as Jean mentioned, like writing is a really fundamental aspect of what we do. And it was the same for history as well, because there was such a heavy emphasis on written communication and your essay writing. So although the style of writing that you're usually engaging with in law or in practicing law is quite different to what you would do in history. A lot of the same types of issues about communicating clearly and in short, sort of digestible sentences still definitely apply. So yeah, I still sometimes have, things that I thought about during my degree about clear writing that also apply here. So yeah, it has definitely been very helpful for that.
It's positive to hear. And what about you, Jean? Because if you didn't do a humanities degree, so a lot of those writing things might, well, yeah, how did those come to you?
So well, actually, I think a lot of science subjects in Cambridge, you do have to write essays. So half of my undergrad results were determined by essays, the other half by multiple choice questions. So I was quite well placed to do the SQE because I was very used to multiple choice questions. Um, I I think and keeping in mind I've come into it not just with my degree but also with my work. I would say the style of writing is different, so that's something I'm sort of trying to get used to. I think looking back to my time in Cambridge, which to be fair is very different as I understand to now. I think sort of being surrounded by sort of high achievers, I suppose you could say, very motivated people, very intelligent, um, helped because I think a lot of people would have gone into Cambridge being the top of their class and etc. And I mean, for me, going into Cambridge was the first time I felt challenged and sort of felt like, gosh, these people are very, very good. So I think, sort of you're placed in that environment and it's probably an initial shock, but then that's kind of what going through life is about. And so you kind of get used to that shock a little bit. And I think through that you learn a lot of organizational skills, keeping yourself organized, motivated, learning how your style of learning and working is. And these things are important when you come to the workplace because it's not the first time you've had to thought about it or be confronted with how you would be doing it. So I think from that perspective, even though I didn't do a humanities subject, and even though I didn't go straight into a law firm, I felt having been to Cambridge, those things helped. And I think sort of generally Cambridge definitely provides you with a very solid academic foundation. Not from a legal perspective, but I can say from a medical perspective, I have learned things at Cambridge that I know other people from other medical schools haven't. So I think whatever you choose to study, if you go into a career that is related to that, I think you'd be well placed to kind of be slightly ahead of the curve.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, apart from the skills, with the good thing about Cambridge and kind of university in general is the fast paced and the challenging working. That it's, obviously you've got certain skills, but also you just learn to produce work really quickly, to work under pressure, to be organized. And all of those things can absolutely be transferred from a university degree into a legal career. So even if you're not necessarily learning essay writing, which, as Jean said in Cambridge, you probably do for most subjects, you are learning to kind of cope with a big amount of workload and meeting deadlines and things. So definitely, whatever degree you do, a lot of those skills you'll be able to transfer onto a legal career. Definitely. Okay, that's really positive. It's really positive to hear. We've got like 3 pre-submitted questions about this. So I feel like I have to ask, do law firms see it as a disadvantage or less competitive if you've not got a law degree? Do they prefer people who do have law degrees, as in undergraduate law degrees, I suppose? Either of you who feels comfortable kind of touching on that?
I would say no. I don't think they see it as a disadvantage. I think they're very used to it. I think overall it's about 50-50 now, the ratio of law and non-law applicants. That's something I remember hearing around the time I was applying. That may have changed, but that's what I recall from that period. And yeah, I think they're very used to people coming from non-law backgrounds, and they're used to interviewing people who haven't come from a law degree. So they're very used to that, and that's fine. And they know that the conversion course will get you to the same level anyway. So I don't think I don't think they perceive it as a disadvantage. One thing someone said to me, which probably does make sense, is that if you come from a law background, they might have higher expectations about your level of knowledge. Whereas if you come from a non-law background, they might scrutinize your motivations more carefully because you have more explaining to do about why you want to like convert to a legal degree, a legal profession. So yeah, that's the only thing to bear in mind. If you do a non-law degree and you end up with an interview, you need to have like some explanation and some story for why you wanted to do that job. But that's just something to bear in mind. I wouldn't see that as like a disadvantage. It's just something you'd need to do to prepare yourself if you get to like an interview or application stage.
Very interesting way of looking at it, actually. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you've got a law degree, I imagine your actual kind of legal knowledge gets scrutinized a lot more. Whereas if you don't, then you have to explain the reasons and what you don't. And I guess that's something that, people watching, if you are somebody studying a non-law degree, be kind of prepared to explain why you want to go into law. And, correct me if I'm wrong here, Alex and Jean, but just saying you want to be a lawyer or having a high salary is potentially not the best reasoning. And you have to have a bit more robust and more of a robust idea about why you want to go into such a challenging and fast-paced career. So yeah, really, really good way of thinking about it. Actually, I'm going to steal that from you, Alex. Thank you. And what about Eugene? What are your thoughts?
I would agree with Alex with a lot of those things that he said. And actually, interestingly, no one ever talks about money. Don't know why. I mean, I have bills to pay, so I think money is very important. But anyway, I don't think anyone's talked about money, so maybe don't talk about that at your interview. I would say, just to add to what Alex said, definitely agree with the knowledge thing, because I remember going to interviews and they were like, "Oh, you didn't do law or anything remotely related, so we won't ask you this legal question." And I'm like, "Okay, yes, that's good, thank you." So I think that's quite helpful. But yes, the motivation side, having a coherent story, kind of demonstrating by going to events to show your enthusiasm, your interest, and also just to show that you know what you're getting yourself into. Because I think particularly what you see on TV, I think people say Suits, is not really reality. So I think it's important for the law firm or for whoever your employer is, and also for yourself, to know what you're getting yourself into, because you won't necessarily like it. And for an employer, they want to make sure that they get someone who will stay on. I would also just say one more thing. If you come from a non-humanity subject, so what I found that I didn't realize at the beginning was that people kind of have preconceived ideas about what you know, or what your skill sets are based on what subject you studied. So people would assume that scientists are not good at writing essays. And I would say that we don't write essays like humanities do, but we do have to write very long essays and papers that you publish. But I think it's important that if you are slightly different to the norm, that you kind of are kind of proactively explaining yourself that actually, whilst it can be seen that, for example, scientists do not write essays, actually we do, just in a different in a different style or in a different sort of situation. So I think be prepared to anticipate kind of those preconceptions, and that will put you in a better stead for your applications.
Very, very useful advice. Thank you. I go on the same disadvantage, I guess, theme. There's a pre-submitted questions about this actually, which is to Jean. Is there a disadvantage about going to be a lawyer later in life? Did you feel like there was a disadvantage, or maybe there is an advantage? I don't know.
I think it is, I think there are both. I think, again, kind of that motivation issue comes up, because you kind of have to wonder, understandably, why, particularly when a law firm is going to be sort of investing so much money into you and so much time. They want to make sure that they've got a safe bet. So I think it's important for career changes to kind of demonstrate that motivation extra hard, so to speak. And I think actually from a practical perspective, it's important to keep in mind that actually these application processes are not geared for people who are working. I've had to turn down vacation schemes because I couldn't get the annual leave for it. So I think from that perspective, it's not something that I think law firms have really considered. But having said that, I think having worked, you kind of understand what working is like, what your employer is looking for, what your team is looking for in you. And so you do actually gain a lot of soft skills. I know like everyone brandy about the term soft skills, but you do gain a lot from having worked in a professional environment where you kind of maybe understand the commerciality of things more, or where your work fits in with the wider context, or just kind of why you're doing what you're doing. It's not to get a good grade or to pass an exam or to please a lecturer or a supervisor. There is a kind of a kind of a commercial factor driving it. So I think once you've worked, you kind of understand that more, and your mindset and the way that you think changes. And I think that's helpful because ultimately a law firm is a business, and you're not doing well, so you can get a star or whatever it's called now. Showing my age. Yeah, so I think from that perspective, it's important. Well, I think it's a good thing to have worked, and you don't feel that fear as much, like, oh my gosh, I've misspelt something. Like I don't really care. I mean, people make mistakes, so I don't feel that same level of anxiety, I think. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that statement that applying for jobs is a full-time job in and of its own. I mean, the couple of times I've done it, I've definitely felt, oh my God, it takes hours of prep, doesn't it? You've got a statement, and you've got your CV, and you've got, gosh, a lot going on. So not to discourage anybody in the audience, but just maybe warning you about adult life a little bit generally. It's a full-time job just to get a job. So yeah, definitely agree on that. Okay, so let's start thinking a little bit maybe about your current life and your current work. Starting with, how did you pick Hogan Lovells? Was it just because, obviously, I think Alex, you mentioned a vacation scheme that you did. Was there other reasons? What other qualities that the firm has that kind of attracted you to them? And perhaps particularly as somebody who, didn't study law, was not always surrounded in the world of law, did you feel like you had to do a bit of extra research just to understand what all the firms are about? If we start maybe with Alex and then, yeah, Jean as well.
Yeah, so on the research side, like it is easier, it is definitely easier now than it was sort of a generation ago, because there's so much information available online. So it's much easier to get a kind of high level overview of what these different firms do and what areas of law that they practice. And that was actually one of my main criteria when trying to choose law firms. I looked at like what practices they had, and I had particular interests, ironically, because it's not what I ended up going into, but I had particular interests in, public law and public international law, which are slightly more niche areas that not every city law firm does. So that was one effective way of creating like a reasonably manageable shortlist. Hogan Lovells was one of those. I applied there, did the vacation scheme there and enjoyed that. So I then felt confident enough to accept an offer from them at the end. But yeah, that was essentially my process. It wasn't the most sophisticated by any means, but that was how I went about it at the time.
Brilliant. What about yourself, Jean?
So I had a mixture of reasons. One, when I was applying, I kind of eradicated all of the firms that said you have to have done or you have to do a vacation scheme to come here. Because sort of by then I sort of realized it wasn't possible. So for practical reasons, I narrowed it down that way. And particularly with Hogan. So also because I wasn't, whilst I had a good idea, I didn't want to kind of pigeonhole myself too early on. I didn't want to go into a firm that did only niche things. Um, so I wanted somewhere that did a lot, like kind of has all the bells and whistles. And that again helps you narrow down things a little bit. And so, but in particular for me, because I come from a science background, Hogan Lovells is very strong in life sciences. Um, I think is one of the very few firms that has all the bells and whistles and is strong in life sciences. So it was one of the few firms kind of on my top ranking firms. I had others and they were American firms. So slightly different culture and such. Not that I think I necessarily minded, but they were different. And ultimately sort of not very there isn't really like a huge amount of cosmic connection. Hogan Lovells was the one that gave me the offer first, and because I needed to hand in my resignation letter, I needed that certainty. So I think sort of I know like a lot of people sort of say, oh, I really connected with this firm. I I enjoy where I am now. People are very nice. You hear sometimes horror stories of other places, so I'm glad I'm not there. But sometimes it is for very practical reasons why people kind of choose where they end up going. And I think it's okay to not have that cosmic connection at the beginning. Yeah.
Fantastic. Regarding vacation schemes, actually, again, whoever feels more comfortable talking about it, are there many firms that require you to do a vacation scheme in order to get a training contract? Because then you kind of touched on that, Jean. Is that something common?
Shall I answer this? Because I think I applied more recently than Alex. Not that many firms. I mean, so I think a few firms on their website say that you have to have done a vacation scheme here, and that's the only kind of way that you can apply. And then I think sort of off the record, so to speak, the word around is that people say that obviously doing a vacation scheme at a firm increases your chance of getting a training contract. I suppose partly because it shows that you're motivated, you know what the particular firm is about, as opposed to just a general idea of that you want to go into a city law firm. Um, and you're better placed at answering the questions about your motivation and all that stuff. Having said that, I didn't actually go into Hogan Lovells with through the vacation scheme route. I actually applied to the direct training contract route. I think it's difficult to see because each firm has their own policy. You do have to kind of go through the like what you said about applying for a job is a full-time job. You do have to kind of do your due diligence and see like what options each firm give you. So Hogan Lovells at the time that I applied allow you to apply both through the vacation scheme and the training contract. But yeah, it sort of depends on the firm. Yeah.
Very useful to know. Actually, for I guess people that might be in university at the minute, kind of thinking about vacation schemes. Um, Two questions for you. And then yeah, we can go to some of the questions from attendees. Just a reminder to attendees. I know there's a couple of questions in the Q&A already, but if you've got more, do put them in now. One of my questions is, what does a typical day look like for you? So what are the main responsibilities you've got as a solicitor? What kind of tasks do you get to day to day? Obviously, you kind of both at sorts of different stages. So I guess it's even more interesting that we can hear what you're doing. Maybe starting with Alex first, who's a little bit more senior.
Yeah, I sometimes say to people I mean, this was an analogy someone once used with me, which I think is kind of true. It can sometimes feel a bit like being at school, and I'll explain what I mean by that. It sounds like a weird thing to say, but it's like you kind of get, if you work in a big city law firm like we do, you kind of get set tasks, a bit like, you know, assignments. For example, if your firm gets asked to advise on something, you might get set, you know, the task of producing the first draft of the written answer to that problem. And that, you know, my boss, for example, he actually calls those things exam questions. And you sort of write an answer to it, and you might have a limited time to do it. So that can feel a lot like, you know, it can feel a lot like writing an essay at school or at university. Another thing that I do quite a lot of work in my current practice is contracts. So that can feel a bit like, maybe it's a bit more like English, where you sort of think like very precisely about like individual word choices, and that can be quite fun. It's a little bit like, it's also being compared to programming sometimes, where you sort of have rules where, you know, if X happens, then there's Y result. So that can be quite an interesting thing to work on. And the typical pattern, if you're junior at least, is that you'll be set a task, produce a written work product, then someone more senior than you will review that work product, and they will give you like feedback on it, and they might mark it up in red pen or something and get you to make further changes or look into something more. And then as you get more senior, you get more like exposure to actually speaking to clients directly and advising them on the phone or in calls or in person. So yeah, the nature of the job kind of changes a lot as you go through. I mean, yeah, you mentioned that I'm more senior, although in the grand scheme of things, like I'm still relatively junior. I mean, I'm 18 months after qualification, and there are, you know, the person that I report to currently has been qualified for over 30 years. So there are people who stick around for a long time. And the training process takes quite a long time, and then the sort of progression that happens after that does build up quite gradually as well, which keeps it interesting, I guess, because the job sort of changes as you go through.
Okay. Do you work in a team then? Because I know you mentioned other people, but is it a team or is it just yourself and your supervisor?
Yeah, it is a team. Yeah, most of the things that I've worked on have been with a group of other people. It can often be that like you might be set a task individually that only you are responsible for, which the supervisor then reviews. So there could be stuff that you do sort of more independently. But a lot of stuff, particularly the bigger projects or the bigger like litigations, like the sort of disputes, which is actually one thing I haven't spoken about so much. Like if you're on one of those, like you'll definitely be with, a group of other people who all have their own aspects of it that they're managing. And actually, it's one of the nice things about this job as well, that when you have issues or problems with something sort of intellectually, like there's always someone to speak about it with. And it happens all the time in my team where people are constantly like bouncing ideas off each other and talking to each other about how they might approach something. So it definitely doesn't feel like you're just in a room by yourself trying to produce a load of work on something really complex. Like you are a member of a group, so that's a really nice feeling.
It's really positive, especially when you've got so much responsibility, isn't it? What about yourself, Jean? What do you get up to in your training contract?
So I think the training contract is a little bit different. I guess not necessarily on a day-to-day basis because you are essentially working just at a slightly more junior level. You need more support because you just don't know and especially for a lot of people coming in, it will be their first job. So kind of also getting used to like a professional setting, um, how like a team works, how an organization, a business works. So you kind of learn all of that as well, mostly by osmosis and kind of by reflecting on the tasks that you do and how it fits in with the wider picture. On top of that, Hogan Lovells provides a lot of training. I mean, I think different law firms provides different level of training or formalized training. I think Hogan Lovells, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, is one of those firms that provide more training. I think some firms just say, go, and then you swim or sink. We're not a firm like that, thankfully. So you, as a trainee, you'd be attending kind of departmental teaching to bring you up to speed with some of the like important and basic things, and also training with your trainee cohort about kind of more soft skills like how do you manage yourself, how do you build confidence, how do you communicate, things like that. um, and then kind of wider group teaching. So for example, my last seat was in real estate litigation, so I had training both from my department in real estate but also from the wider litigation team. So yes, there's a lot of training, and you get to participate, I think probably more as a trainee level, on pro bono matters, because I think sort of some pro bono matters seem to only go to the training mailing list. So you get an opportunity to try your hand in different things. And with pro bono matters, you kind of get to try things out that you wouldn't be doing in your department, because they could be sort of different matters, and like sort of, because Hogan Lovells is strong in public law, there's public law things, or sort of contract negotiation or contract drafting. Um, yeah, and then sort of you kind of learn from each other, from your trainees. Um, and then on a day-to-day basis, you interact mostly with your department. The team I just left was actually quite a small team, so we didn't actually have big matters where like you hear 20 people are working on the same thing. It was mainly just me and reporting directly to a supervisor above. So I work independently doing a task, and then by the time I think it's kind of done and ready, or as well as I can do it, I send it on to someone to review, and then they can either make comments or sort of, yeah, suggest further improvements. So that's sort of like a day-to-day basis.
Do you maybe see what pro bono work is for anybody that might not be? Well,
Oh, yes, sorry. Or
that's
maybe
right.
Alex can go
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, so the usual way that the law firm sort of business works is they charge for time. So the longer it takes to do something, the more expensive it is, and it's usually, I mean, this sounds like really specific, but they will usually bill for time in 6-minute units. So if you get set a task that takes you half an hour, then you bill 5 6-minute units, and that's the unit that they charge for. So you basically charge for your time. Pro bono work is different because you don't charge at all, and you work for someone for free. And so a lot of the most law firms will do this, and they do it specifically for, charities or individuals in difficult situations you wouldn't otherwise be able to pay. So they do the work that they get paid for, which is sometimes called chargeable work, for like bigger corporations that you've probably heard of. And then they'll do pro bono work as well for like charities and smaller individuals. And it's actually, yeah, it's a really good thing to do because, yeah, it has, a social utility outside of your work, but also as Jean was saying, you get to work with a lot of other people who you might not otherwise work with because they're not connected to the department that you are assigned to for the purposes of chargeable work, and you might end up getting a chance to try something that you wouldn't usually do. And trainees in particular get a chance to take on like more responsibility than they might otherwise do. And they can also, yeah, I think in some cases that we have trainees who actually do oral advocacy, which would be pretty rare for a trainee to do in like a regular chargeable work situation. So yeah, it's definitely a really interesting dimension of the work that you can do as a lawyer.
Oh, yes, very good explanation. Thank you so much, Alex. So actually we'll go straight to questions because there's a few that are pre-submitted and coming in. So I kind of want to touch on those first. My last question was going to be what's your favorite thing about your job? So hopefully we can keep that for the end if we've got enough time. So one of the questions somebody asks is basically interview techniques and what to say if you do get asked, why didn't you do a law degree? Why did you choose to go into law, although you've studied something different? Why do you want to do a law conversion basically? What kind of answer would you give to a question like this? And that's somebody who says that they want to follow Alex's path and do history, specifically. So clearly an inspiration, Alex, for the population. So what would your answer to this be? Either sort of view. What do you say if somebody asks you this?
I actually it's funny that question should come up. I did actually meet someone, one of the other trainees who started at Hogan Lovells at the same time as me, who actually wanted to be a lawyer all along, having done history. So he was different to me in that he'd got into the history degree with an explicit idea of law as the outcome, and he obviously succeeded. So you can definitely do that. I think, yeah, the sort of the ways that you would justify it are probably going to come from a combination of your what you do in your degree potentially, and what experiences you've had outside of that, or just anything you have from your existing experience that's going to help inform why you might want to actually enjoy work as a lawyer. So it's probably a little bit easier potentially if you do have a humanities background because you can emphasize the writing aspect like I did earlier on. And if you've had other work experience that might have some elements that are transferable, like working in a team, for example, you can bring those in as well. So even if you haven't had any work experience, you can still use the full range of all the things that you have experienced to like justify what it is about a legal career that would appeal to you. And ideally, if you can, connect that to like conversations you've had with people or things that you've heard at events like this, and that can make the answer seem more credible.
Brilliant. Um, so another question we had is, sorry, I've just got a million windows in front of me right now. Really, really interesting question actually. I want to hear the answer as well. How do you account for interview 6 minutes? Do you make notes of what you do? Do you say, oh, I wrote an email, so this took me 5 minutes? Does it work differently? How does this happen?
Yeah, so we're actually given software for that now, and I'm not sure how people coped with it before that was available. But yeah, you get given a special software that, I mean, there's no reason why you'd have used it unless you'd worked in a law firm or something similar. But it basically gives you like a series of clocks, and you just start the clock when you start a task and stop the clock when you finish it, and you write underneath the clock like a description of what you were doing. I mean, yeah, I've actually got a clock running now, believe it or not, specifically for this event because, yeah, it's one of the this is actually one of the aspects of working in a law firm that a lot of people don't like. So it's funny that this should come up actually. Um, yeah, it's different if you work in a lawyer, if you work as a lawyer inside like a company and you're an internal lawyer. But if you work in a law firm, this time recording aspect is, um, yeah, it's usually something that people find quite tedious, but you do absolutely you have to do it, and literally everything you do is recorded, even if it's not charged for. So this, for example, like there's no payment involved, but I still have to account for what I'm doing. So if someone were to go through my timesheets, as they're called, they have like an audit trail of everything I was doing when. So yeah, it is. Yeah, that's one aspect of this job to bear in mind. But you get used to doing it, and it just becomes like a habit, like anything else. And I've sometimes found as well, I have this weird sensation if I'm doing like a personal admin task in my personal life, I have this instinct to like start a clock, and I realize that I don't need to. But yeah.
Could be useful in your personal life, wouldn't it, as well? Like I always think that I've got some things going on, and it's probably just put a clock on it, try and make a timesheet, you know. And is that the same for a training contract, Jean? Does that also apply to your training contract?
Yes, it does. So I think different law firms do it differently as well. But for example, Hogan Lovells trainees are not so going sort of referencing what Alex was talking about, the chargeable time and non-chargeable time. So law firms make money from working for clients and charging them money for it, sort of at a very basic level. So if you are doing something that's internal, so for example, this, we're not charging Cambridge for this, so it's kind of non-chargeable time. And at Hogan Lovells, trainees don't have a kind of, it doesn't matter how much chargeable versus non-chargeable time we do. Obviously, you can't be sort of watching Netflix at work and saying that's non-chargeable time, but at different levels in the law firm, you kind of, there will be an expectation at least that you will be kind of contributing financially, I suppose, to the firm. And with trainees, and I suppose maybe that's part of the reason why we get pro bono work a lot as well, is that um, we don't have to worry about that so much yet because um, part of the way that we can contribute to the firm, for example, is through doing pro bono work or doing more of the administrative tasks, where it's more, I suppose, economical for a trainee who to do it rather than someone who charges more for their time. So at different levels, you charge different amounts of money for your time. So a trainee would charge the lowest in the solicitor rank, and then so Alex would charge more than me, and as you go higher up, you would charge more and more. So part of that is informed by money, but also part of that is sort of informed by just trainees can't do a huge amount of decision making, and part of this is for our training. So you shouldn't have to worry about exactly how much chargeable time you're doing. Yeah, so but it does depend on the law firm. I think some are a bit more stringent about it. I think Hogan Lovells says we just have to we just have to do 7 hours per day, and it doesn't, they don't have to be all chargeable time. Yeah.
So fascinating. It's a very different world to me, so I find it fascinating. So when you do sort of a, what am I trying to say here? When you qualify as a lawyer, when you're working as a lawyer, how quickly can you specialize in a specific area of law? And do you specialize as a solicitor in any area of law at any point? Or do you always just kind of do a mixture of things? I suppose, Alex, you're a little bit, yeah, further on maybe.
So it kind of depends where you go. If you're a solicitor in a firm like Hogan Lovells, then you do have to specialize at the end of the training contract, and you start to get more and more specialist quite quickly because that's actually how the firm's like business models work. So they're able to charge a lot per hour or per 6-minute unit because of the expertise that someone has. It's a little bit different if you become a lawyer who works as an internal lawyer inside a company. That's a bit different, and your role there can be much more general. So if you just, let's just pick a random company, say, Starbucks or something, if you were, an internal lawyer there, potentially, your roles might be, much more diverse than they would be if you were working at a firm like Hogan Lovells, where generally like you're expected to specialize more in a particular area. So yeah, and some people, for some people that really appeals, so they keep going with the private practice route, and for others, they prefer to be more general, so they become internal lawyers. There are also some internal lawyers who are also very specialized, so there are all kinds of caveats to this, but it does depend a little bit on who you're employed by and whether you're employed as an internal lawyer inside a company or whether you're at a law firm.
Oh,
Yes.
and sorry, I'll
Oh,
just add
yes,
to
Jean.
Alex that obviously by applying to somewhere like Hogan Lovells, you have specialized somewhat already into commercial law. So, for example, we do not do family law or criminal law. Well, apart from maybe some fraud things, but no, not your kind of theft. So whereas I think if you so I don't think you would be able to go from a point where you literally can go into anything. I think at the point of the job application, you have kind of devoted yourself to a very broad but still an area of law, and you'd be going down that route. Yeah, so that's just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. I mean, in a way, you already specialized even more than that when you choose to become a solicitor or a barrister, don't you? Because that's also quite a big choice that people studying law might make. So you're already kind of going down all of these funnels. But yeah, thank you so much, Jean. That actually is really smart. So I've actually got two questions. I'm going to ask one to each of you because I want to touch on both of them, but we don't have endless time and I don't want to keep everybody here for too long. I want to ask Alex first. What is your favorite thing about your job?
Actually, you asked a question earlier about working as part of teams, and I think that's probably the best part of it for me. And that wasn't something that I'd expected going into it, because going into it, I'd thought very much about like the actual work itself, and the sort of academic interest in that work and the research and the drafting and all of those technical things. But one of the things that surprised me was how much enjoyment I got from the feeling of collaborating with people and getting on with them and being part of a team and you all being in it together on something. So actually that's something that I've really enjoyed, and made some great connections with people here. And it's not something that I'd have thought about before going into this. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah, working as a team is quite nice. I say as I'm alone in my office at the minute. So yeah. And then last question to Jean. What advice would you give to somebody who is perhaps studying a different subject right now, or might even be a little bit further in their career? What things can they do? Do they attend networking events? Do they do research online? What would be your sort of advice to somebody who is in that position?
I think, well, practically, if you've decided on law or I guess a specific area of law, then it's kind of doing things to prove your motivation. So for example, I went to a lot of events, not this one because I wouldn't have been able to, being not a student, but similar events to sort of essentially put on my CV to say that I've been to it. I know what I'm talking about. Um, I know why I want to do this. Um, and doing a vacation scheme definitely helps, even if you don't get the training contract from that firm. Again, it sort of shows, one, you're motivated, you're willing to give up 2 to 3 weeks of your time to do this. And second, it again sort of reinforces the fact that you know what you're doing, you've seen this firsthand. Um, and I guess from a kind of whether it's the right choice for you or not perspective, I think I would say speak to lots of different people. Get their perspective on things. Different people like their jobs for different reasons, and a lot of them are very personal. So just I would always kind of beware of people saying, "Oh, I love my job," because just because they love it doesn't mean you will love it. You are a different person. You have a different set of motivations and characteristics. So I think to make sure that you kind of enter it with your eyes open as much as possible. I would say speak to lots of different people, ask them, don't be afraid to ask people personal questions about their motivations and their kind of professional choices. I think, and also I suppose for kind of younger people, it your first job, you always learn a lot from it. It doesn't have to mean that it is something that you will stick with for the rest of your life. For me, I felt that actually changing careers and doing all of the things to get a job, to change careers, was actually extremely educational for me, that I wouldn't have done in medicine, because it was just kind of like one training program after another, and you sort of know exactly what to do. You just have to tick the boxes. For doing something like this, you do actually have to think outside of the box, really question your own motivations, what you want to do in life, but also learn a whole new set of skills of how you actually go about finding out about different jobs, how to do it. So that's like a whole new set of skills that I've acquired. So so I think there's a lot to it. So I guess don't be afraid if you're not sure exactly. It's not the end of the world if you're like, gosh, I actually don't like this. Because I think sort of at a firm like this, you will gain a lot of skills. It's a great firm to put on your CV as well. You'll meet lots of people, you will learn lots of things. So I don't think it's like it would be a wrong choice, even if you don't end up sticking with it.
And on that wonderfully motivational note, we can finish the webinar for today. So thank you so, so much to Alex and to Jean for the wonderful advice, sharing their experiences with us and telling us a little bit more about going into a legal career without a law degree, and just being encouraging and motivational and showing you that you can do it. You can't change your mind. And yeah, it might take some research, it might take some experience, but it is absolutely doable as well. So thank you so, so much both. So our webinars actually continue next week. They actually finish next week. So we're going to be talking about doing a law degree this time, but not going into a legal career. So we're going to flip the switch a little bit. So if you're somebody who thinks, oh gosh, now I'm kind of convinced I don't want to go into a legal career, but I do want to study law, that webinar is for you. And I've put all of the information about that on the chat box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. So do go and register if you're interested as well. And once again, thank you so, so much to our panelists, and thank you so much to all of the attendees. Thank you for coming. We hope to see you next week, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your evening and a wonderful rest of your week as well. Bye.
Bye.